Alright, welcome to the channel. Today, I have for you two sighting reports just outside of Yellowstone National Park and one inside. The first one is by two United States geologists, the second one is by a hiker, and the third one is by the famous park ranger Action Jackson. I have his sighting, and I also have the other stories that he has heard throughout his career. As always, I'm going to give you the reports and I'm going to show you the locations where these happened. If you're new and that sounds good to you, you might as well go ahead and hit the subscribe button right here, because chances are you're going to like what you see. Alright, let's go ahead and get into this. May 1978, Wyoming, just outside of Yellowstone Park. We were on a winding reach of highway with dense forest cover on either side. At the precise location of the sighting, we identified a standard under-road culvert with a secondary channel flowing through. There were standard metal barriers on either side of the road protecting the culvert and vehicles. We had seen no homes or lights for perhaps 30 minutes, and it was another 30 minutes before we reached the park gates, where there were no rangers available to report the sighting to. The sighting was witnessed by my friend and myself, both geologists, while driving into Yellowstone from Cody for employment at the park for the summer. My friend was taking his turn in driving, and I was soaking up as much as I could see, as well as providing a running commentary to keep my friend alert during our long drive. As we came around a curve in the road, our high beams illuminated a large, dark, shaggy figure coming up out of the ditch on the left side, south side of the road, at a distance of about 200 to 250 feet. We approached the figure at a speed of about 45 miles per hour. It looked first at the vehicle. We noticed the yellow reflection from its eyes that is seen in a dog's eyes when light catches it at night. Then it deliberately turned its head away from the lights. That motion was non-human or bear-like, in that the shoulders, chest, and head moved simultaneously as it caught sight of our vehicle and then turned its face away from the headlights. We slowed. We slammed on the brakes, stunned at what we were seeing and trying to rationalize what we were looking at. A hominid creature, perhaps 7 to 7.5 feet in height. We have a 7-foot friend as a reference. Massing perhaps 600 to 800 pounds without obvious signs of obesity. Standing completely and comfortably upright. Came out of the ditch from the left side of the road at the edge of the metal barrier above the culvert. It took 3 extraordinarily long and fluid strides across the highway, which is 22 feet across, and another 3 or 4 shorter strides down the other side of the road, actually appearing to catch hold of the metal barrier or railing with one long, fingered, hairy hand and swinging down under the road into the box culvert or channel bottom, completely out of our line of sight. We stopped the vehicle within 25 feet of the culvert and watched the final descent of the creature into the darkness of the channel. At this point, we sped on towards the east gate of Yellowstone National Park, hoping to find a ranger to report the sighting to, and perhaps to go back and take another look. There was no one at the gate due to the late hour, and we didn't see any lights on anywhere, so we continued on to our destination, and went to bed deciding not to contaminate each other's observations with discussing until morning. In the morning, we both independently described graphically and in writing as much of what we had seen 6 hours earlier. This is a synopsis of our findings. They were virtually identical down to the movement of which leg moved first as the creature crossed the road. The head appeared to merge into the neck, and there was no snout or protrusion from the face as would be commonly seen in a bear. I've seen hundreds up close and in person. The face was not clearly visible and was only glimpsed for a moment. We both got an impression of long hair covering some of it. The nostrils were large and open, but neither of us were able to describe the mouth or teeth. The eyes weren't exceptional, just a reflection of gold like a dog's. What each of us can still describe with great clarity is the size, shape, and unique fluid movement of the creature. It was big, 7.5 footish, but not much bigger than that. It was heavy and powerful looking. In shape, it possessed a rather blocky yet elongated head, slightly domed on top of the cranium. Thick, short neck, broad shoulders, full chest. It was square and longer through the torso and hips than a human. As it walked across the road in front of us, the buttocks were clearly seen as muscular masses moving under heavy shaggy hair. They obviously attach to long, powerful, muscular thighs longer in proportion to a human. Big knees that function as a human knee. Thick, muscular calves and feet in proportion to the rest of its oversized body. The soles of the feet appear to be hairless or less covered in hair and very dark in color. The arms hung from heavily muscled shoulders and were longer than a human, reaching to knee length and extending fully in almost a horizontal position to the rear of the body as it moved. The elbows were perhaps a little further down the arm than that on a human, or the unusual length of the arm made it appear so. The hands were large and long-fingered. Neither of us could later describe the palms, nails, or other than the back of the hands, which were covered in the same long, shaggy, dark brown hair as the rest of the creature. The creature made no sound nor gesture throughout the sighting. It appeared a little startled at our vehicle appearing out of the night, but in no other way did it appear frightened or threatening. It startled the heck out of the two of us, though. July 2000, just outside of Yellowstone National Park. I am an outdoor enthusiast who was visiting the Cody, Wyoming area this summer during the second week of July. While traveling the highway to Yellowstone National Park, about 30 or 40 miles west of Cody, I encountered heavy tourist traffic late in the day. I decided rather than fight it, to pull off the highway for a while and go for a walk. I hiked up an unmarked path north of the highway through intermittent timber. I was traveling at a leisurely pace, exploring rocky outcrops and looking for Native American artifacts. About a half a mile from the road, I could still hear the traffic. I heard some rocks rolling down the hill ahead of and above me. It was maybe 50 to 100 yards away. Mule deer and other game animals are plentiful in the area, and I didn't think much of it. I had bear spray with me, as this is well-known grizzly country. Maybe another half an hour went past, and I was taking a break, sitting on a rock ledge with a good view of the valley to the south. I heard underbrush breaking not far away on a steep, timber-covered slope that led down to a dry stream bed. I was able to distinguish the pattern of an animal walking through the trees. Again, I didn't think much of it. I'm used to hearing game in the woods and don't spook at stuff like that. I guessed that it was probably deer feeding along the slope, although it was a little odd considering the time of day. Its behavior was highly inconsistent with bears, which don't hang around when people show up. I started hiking again and almost immediately heard something move through the brush just below me in the same spot. This was a little strange, I thought, like it was staying with me or something. I tried to see down the hill, but when I stopped, I couldn't hear it. It seemed to stop moving when I did, and I couldn't get a fix on its location. I began to get a somewhat uneasy feeling about things at this point. There is no good way to describe it other than something seemed to be intentionally staying with me. I started walking again, and shortly after, not having heard anything for a little while, I heard something run across the rocks not far up in front of me. It was up out of the drainage at this point. I was getting a little apprehensive by this time and decided to start back towards the road, which was maybe a mile away. I walked pretty quickly, and for most of the way I heard nothing. But about a quarter of a mile or so from the highway, and maybe 15 minutes since I turned around and headed back, I heard rocks and debris falling down slope again. It seemed awfully close. I instinctively whirled around thinking that I might see something, which I did. I will do my best to describe it, but as I only got a short glimpse, I can't be too sure of what it was. It was about 60 or 70 yards away on a rocky slope, immediately adjacent to the same heavily timbered slope that I had been walking along. As soon as I turned and looked at it, it jumped right away into the cover and completely out of sight. There is one thing I am absolutely certain of. Whatever it was upright. I clearly could see two limbs off the ground that appeared more like arms than legs. They were definitely hanging down to the side and not down the front as one might expect of a four-legged animal standing on two legs. This doesn't mean that it wasn't a bear, but I've never heard of a bear acting like this thing was. That is, if I'm right, and it is the same animal that I feel was following me all along. You hear about predatory bear behavior where they follow people though, so who knows. At any rate, the animal was brown with very long hair. I noticed that when it leapt into the woods, the hair swayed to one side from the sudden motion. It seemed longer than bear hair, and to notice the swaying effect at this distance, I would guess that maybe the hair was a foot long or more. Also, just for that initial instant before its flight, I got a pretty good look at its face, which was long and somewhat flat. It was too far away to clearly make out individual features. But I have seen several bears at greater distances, and it doesn't strike me that that's what it was. I was not aware of this sight at the time, nor of the other Bigfoot occurrences detailed in it for this area. When I mentioned the incident to a friend who had not heard of the site earlier, we did a net search on Bigfoot out of curiosity. I was a little astonished to find out this region as potential Bigfoot country with recent sightings. So I figured I might as well say something. I think all 3 of the other incidents had witnesses, and I didn't. So I can't point to another who can verify anything I saw or heard. It would have been nice just to see if someone else that day had seen something resembling what I think I saw. Trust me, it takes a little bit of time for it to register. You just don't think right off, hey, there's Bigfoot. I was probably almost at my vehicle before I even let that thought enter my mind. I can't say for sure that what I saw is what I had been hearing in the woods throughout the hike. One tends to make these connections afterwards, but I really have no way of knowing. I will say, however, that I think it might have been. This is based more on a feeling than anything else. I realized that branches breaking and rock slides don't exactly constitute scientific certainty. It really was like something was checking me out, though. Yellowstone Park, 1970s and 80s. Ranger Jackson, also known as Action Jackson, was legendary among park supporters, notorious among outfitters and scofflaws for his enforcement of park rules and regulations. He retired as a Yellowstone Ranger in 2004. Few people have ever known Yellowstone's backcountry and its wildlife like Jackson. In the long history of Yellowstone backcountry rangers, Bob Jackson stands out as one of the most colorful. Jackson is the last of his kind, a lawman who still chases down outlaws on horseback. During his career, Jackson spent a great deal of time in the park's most remote backcountry, including the Thoroughfare, the place in the lower 48 states that lies furthest from a road. Alright, so this is what Action Jackson has to say. The first time I heard anything was in the mid-late 70s. An outfitter and I were riding up Fan Creek in the northwest section of the park. Up the drainage in Stellaria Creek, we heard a sound that just kept going and going. It was probably a mile away. It filled the whole valley up, kind of like 1,000 elk going to their death. I couldn't believe this thing had that much volume for that long of a period of time. The outfitter had never heard anything like it either. A couple weeks later, I was coming out from Sportsman Creek, taking a trail which comes out of Fan Creek. I was 11 miles back in, up high in a subalpine fir meadow complex. I was on a steep side hill with horses and in woods, but down below, about 40 to 50 yards, there was kind of a fairly flat meadow with dense subalpine thickets. There were these low fir growths that have a centerpiece tree and that everything kind of cone shapes to the ground. They were about 20 yards wide or so. The horses were flaring their noses and snorting like they do when a grizzly bear is real close, but I could see fairly good all around and I couldn't see one. So I started looking down below me, and the horses were really agitated. They're wanting to get out of there. I held them, but only with effort. I looked down to see where the grizz was, and I saw a deer at the edge of the thicket. All at once it bolted and started jarring ahead perpendicular. Right then, coming out of the other side was this thing that was running on 2 feet. It was black like a bear, and it had long arms and ran. I think it held in there for 30 seconds, but it got scared and then came out. It ran, but not super fast. It ran to another thicket, and then went at an angle out of the thicket to another thicket, about 40 to 50 yards away. At this point, the creature was 75 yards down slope. It kept running from thicket to thicket trying to get away from me. I've never seen a bear do that. They'll always take a straight line. The first thing I thought was bear, but right away I realized this black shaggy thing wasn't a bear. This thing was smart. I've never seen animals trying to pick up protection as it fled like that. I tied that together with the sound I had had on the other side of the drainage. It wasn't that tall. It looked like it was like 6 foot, maybe 6.5 foot. The side of the face looked like it had a lot of fur. Most of the time it was angling away, so I only got a good look at the head for probably the first 10 steps. The proportions of the torso, it looked more stocky than anything else. I noticed the arms swung more than a human's would. and it didn't have its elbows cocked. This was no hoax. I've ridden maybe 50,000 to 70,000 miles in the backcountry on horses, and you encounter a lot of bears when you do that. This thing, whatever it was, the horses looked straight down to it. Alright, so Jackson goes ahead and mentions things that he's heard about in the park about this creature. One guy I met in the northeast section of the park, he was camped illegally. He said he heard a noise real close to him. I made him describe it. He said it was probably within 20 yards. One other outfitter heard that sound also. Another time, a crew examining the blister rust, a disease of white bark pine, in the 1970s came on an elk in the southeast corner of the park. They came on a deboned elk and saw these real big footprints. They got kind of scared and headed out. On that same trip, they heard really weird noises up near Mountain Creek. Jackson says that at one time I was skiing into Heart Lake on the thoroughfare. We were 5 to 6 miles east of the road. All at once we saw these footprints going across the trail. There wasn't any path. No one used to ski that far back then. These were real big footprints stretched out very far apart. It was deep snow, but it was a fairly distinct track. That was the first and only track that I've seen. In early to the mid-'80s, in the same drainage as Mountain Creek, we were just coming into the Howell Creek cabin near Eagle Creek Pass at 8,500 feet. We were coming in right before dark, and we heard that noise again. I timed it at 26 seconds long, about 300 to 400 yards beyond the cabin up the drainage. I checked the next day but couldn't find any footprints. Whatever that thing is, it doesn't let up to take a breath. It's like mechanical, rhythmical. I can't even describe it. It isn't like a mountain lion or bear, and bear can make some pretty weird noises. I heard no other reports of Bigfoot until 3 to 4 years ago. A district ranger once took a sighting from a backpacker near Beulah Lake that would have been in the 70s, west of the south entrance. Apparently, the person watched one on the other side of a small lake for 10 minutes. The ranger felt the witness was very sane. Wow, Action Jackson in Yellowstone Park. That goes back to President Teddy Roosevelt and his Bauman encounter that he wrote about and his own personal experience he had about hearing these creatures. If you're new and you're into these kind of videos, I got this playlist right here you can watch, and you might as well go ahead and hit that subscribe button right there. Everybody leave me some comments, let me know what you think about the theory about these national parks being set aside for these creatures. And as always, do me a favor and go ahead and smash that like button. The more likes I get, the more the YouTube algorithm loves it, which definitely helps me. Always remember, everybody, where there is a Willstar, there is definitely a way. Willstar out.